Okay. Do I just leave, I can just leave this, do I just move this up and down like when I'm not using it? That's mine.
Oh, okay.
That's good.
See, it's magic.
It's working. Okay. Hello. Thank you for all coming out. Um, I wanted to share a little bit before we get started here, but let me open up with prayer. Father, I just thank you for this time that we can come together and just see what the book of Esther tells us, Lord. It's about how you um, saved your people. Even though you're not mentioned in the book, you're all over the book. And we just thank you, Lord, that you're all over our lives and you're with us. And we just give you glory for this evening. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay. I was trying to find something to kind of explain it a little bit, and I get emails from Intercessors for America, and they had this thing about Purim on here, so um, I'm just going to read it. It says, Purim is a holiday that commemorates the salvation of the Jewish people from extermination. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. I don't normally do this kind of thing. In ancient Persia. In the book of Esther, the story of how Purim came to be is laid out verse by verse. It tells the amazing story of a young Jewish woman named Esther who stood up for her people at a great cost to her own life. She used her royal position for such a time as this. The story of Purim has many parallels to our nations right now and has many lessons to teach us about dealing with the evil in our generation. We have an enemy who wants nothing more than to wipe out the names of the conservatives. Our ways and ideas are different than the ideas of those who call themselves liberal. In their world, conservatives' beliefs should not be tolerated. When conservatives will not bow down to the agenda that violates their beliefs, they become targets. Bitterness and hate drive the media, big tech, and those in positions of authority. Like Haman, they use their influence and power to spread lies and hide the truth. They have issued their own decree against biblical values and free speech. Esther does not let fear win. Instead, she fights, she acts, she decides she will go to the king and place her lives in of her people. If she perishes, she perishes. To prepare, she fasts for 3 days. She also asked other Jews to join her. As believers and conservatives, we are in a royal position to intercede for our nation like Esther. We are shining stars in a world of darkness. We carry an aroma of righteousness that becomes evident when we speak in truth. We are a kingdom of priests who have been placed in this moment in time to plead for the lives of our people. We can act in fear or hopes that delivers when we'll come for somewhere else. But if we become the intercessors who fast, pray, and act, we can see victory in ways we never thought possible. The victory can come in many forms, and we may not know the exact outcome, but we are called to act in our royal positions nonetheless. We intercede, and it's up to God as to how he will respond. In America, right now, we are seeing many evil plots plan out like a frightening movie. There are villains spreading lies as they try to remove our biblical foundations. The villain in the story of Esther is named Haman. This name sounds like the Hebrew word Hamas, which means violence. As a verb, Hamas means to rob, destroy, and take by violence. The word probably sounds familiar to you because it's the name of the Islamic terrorist organization that commits violence acts against Israel. This year on Purim, let's remember that God has placed us in our royal positions for such a time as this. We must heed the call when it comes. We must act with courage, knowing Yeshua stands with us. Like Queen Esther, let us step up to the challenge so we can shine. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to introduce all the players, and then we're going to have a couple of songs, then we're going to have the skit, and then after the skit we will have another song, and there'll be some Hamantaschen cookies. And they're cookies that are shaped like Haman's hat, and my phone doesn't stay on. It says, it's long-held belief that the three corners of the triangle-shaped Hamantaschen represents Haman's favorite three-cornered hat. Supposedly, taking a bite out of the cookie is the defiance of bowing down to Haman and providing him from carrying out his evil plan. That's why I have those. So I'm going to go down the line and introduce everybody. So when I introduce you, stand up and turn around so they can see who you are. This is King Xerxes. And this is a eunuch, a servant, wise man, all that. And this is our narrator, Christine. And this is another servant and eunuch. And this is Haman. And this is Mordecai. And this is Queen Vashti. And yeah, these two here are servant maidens, and a servant. And then we have the virgin girls here. If you guys want to stand up, you don't have to. Then we have another eunuch, servant / wise men, scribes. Those guys are scribes too. And so is this little guy here too. He's in with the big guys. And Bill is too. And then we got the main character, Esther. So we're going to go ahead and put some music on and have a couple worship songs, and then the last song is called Such a Time as This, Esther's song, and then we'll get right into the program.
convinced that we are more than conquerors. We are more than conquerors. For I'm convinced. Yes, I'm convinced that we are more than conquerors. We are more than conquerors. If God is for us, whom then will we have to fear? If God is for us, then nothing can stand against us. No angels, no demons, not present, past or future, no height or depth. Yes, I'm convinced. No powers, no rulers, and nothing in creation can separate us from His love. No angels, no demons, not present, past or future, no height or depth. Yes, I'm convinced. No powers, no rulers, and nothing in creation can separate us from His love. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I Here we wait for you, longing for the day to be with you, and all you said you'll do, 'cause we know that all your promises are true. Oh, we know that all your promises are true. Lift up your voice and say, our God is worthy to be praised. Forever we will shout your name, God Almighty.
God is worthy to be praised. Forever we will shout your name. God Almighty reigns. Our God reigns. So lift up your voice and say, our God is worthy to be praised. Forever we will shout your name. God Almighty reigns. Our God reigns. Here we wait for you, longing for the day to be with you. Who am I that I should find myself right here, right now? Who am I to try to save these lives some way, somehow? Can it be that you chose me, a girl who no one knew? So afraid, unsure, not knowing what to say, what to do.
For such a time as this, for such a time as this, are you our help? Are you our hope? At such a time as this, is there before you now a chance you dare not miss? Could it be you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? You and I know you're the one to go before the King.
How I fear that he won't hear the message that I bring.
I see you there, so young, so scared, not knowing what will be.
If I should go, please tell my people I've one plea. Pray for me. for such a time as this.
Will you find mercy there?
Or will I perish? Who can say?
Still at this time we cannot keep silent. We will stand. We will pray for such a time as
Oh
this.
my, how could it be?
For such a time as
That you would
this.
choose someone like me.
There is a
Oh,
help, there is a hope at such a time as this. There is before us now a chance we dare not miss. Could it be we have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? There is before us now a chance we dare not miss. Could it be we have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? We have come to the kingdom for such a time
as
Now it came to pass in the days of King Xerxes, this was the Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Xerxes sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household, that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which belonged to King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew the law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marshena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Xerxes brought to her by the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's behavior will become known to women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti will come no more before King Xerxes. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the words of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house and speak the language of his own people. Chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Xerxes subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan the citadel there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Haggai, that Esther was also taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided from her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes after she had completed 12 months' preparation, according to the regulations from the women. And thus the 6 days of their preparation apportioned, 6 months with oil and myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, into the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. And she would not go into the king again, unless the king delighted in her and called her by name. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Xerxes into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set a royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast for the feast of Esther and all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai, as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, Two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthon and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Chapter 3. After these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow, did not bow or pay homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the kingdom of King Xerxes, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, they cast Pur, that is the lot, before Haman, to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all their provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded. To the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province according to its script, and every people in their language, in the name of King Xerxes it was written, and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Shushan was perplexed. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. And went out into the midst of the city. He cried with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him. But he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs whom she had appointed to attend her. And she gave him a command concerning Mordecai, to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her, and that he might command her to go to the king and make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther of the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death except the one to whom he holds the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go into the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Chapter 5. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther his golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, and Haman today, to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet which Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this: if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above all the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, "Besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see that Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high in the morning. Suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet." And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servants said to him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor. Let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Xerxes answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who would dare presume to do such a thing in his heart?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked man, Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went out into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai." Who spoke good on the king's behalf. Is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hung Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Chapter 8. On that day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hamdatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen?" Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke." So the king's scribes were called at that time in the third month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of all the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, and every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote it in the name of the king Xerxes, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding royal horses bred from swift steeds. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day, in the provinces of King Xerxes, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for every people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves and their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor, and in every province and the city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all the people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai was upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased to those who hated them. And in Shushan the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamdatha, the enemy of the Jews. They killed, but did not lay a hand on the plunder. That day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan the citadel was brought to the king. And the king said to Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the citadel, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done." Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow, according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded this to be done, and the decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. And King Xerxes imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the account of greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the books of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Xerxes, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of all his people, and speaking peace to his countrymen.
Well, thank you, everybody, for doing those parts. It was fun. There's going to be some hamantaschen back there to eat and fellowship, but we're going to play one song, the victory song. And there was something else I was going to say, and I forgot. Oh, yeah. I know that. I have a card. I have 2 cards because in the story where it talks about how they give gifts and they give to the poor, we have a family in the One for Messiah congregation that we're going to help, and then we're also going to send some to Sparkles. It's in Arizona. So we're going to take up an offering for that to help the people in need. And we'll do that after we do the victory song. There'll be a basket back there. Is that basket back there? And you guys can just put, whatever you want to put in there to help out. But I'll have a card so you guys can sign and, say whatever you want to say. One for Sparkles and one for, what's David's last name? The one with the little baby? Roop. So the Roop family. So anyways, we're going to have the song now.
Yeah, this is the way to welcome a king. Come on. over all, and you reign forever. Shout for joy with the voice of triumph. Clap your hands, all you people. We will sing to the Lord, and forever you will be a song of victory. Glory in the highest. Glory in the highest. Glory in the highest. You have won the victory. Glory in the highest. Glory in the highest. Glory in the highest. You have won the victory. Won the victory. We will rise at the sound of your voice, and the earth it will shake with the might of your glory, and nothing will proclaim as we cry out your name. Shout for joy with a voice of triumph. Clap your hands, all you people. You are Lord over all, and you reign forever. Shout for joy with a voice of triumph. Clap your hands, all you people. We will sing to the Lord, and forever we will. Shout for joy with a voice of triumph. Clap your hands, all you people. You are Lord over all, and you reign forever. Shout for joy with a voice of triumph. Clap your hands, all you people. We will sing to the Lord, and forever you will be a song of victory. Oh yeah!
We win. That's right. Every time. Well, thank you for coming tonight. Before we dismiss, I want to say a couple things. First of all, Purim is a prophetic statement of what God is doing in our day now. Okay? The timing of it is not coincidence. Okay? So I want us to all be aware of that God, you see in the book of Esther how God set things up, but the people in the going through those circumstances didn't know how it was going to turn out, didn't know the timing of how the scroll was read to the king that very same night. Haman is out there in the court to hang the very guy that's supposed to be rewarded that same night. So, just the way God lines things up, I want to encourage you that God has things lined up right now, okay? It's not like he is caught off guard or doesn't know what to do about everything going on in the world, all right? He's got things lined up, and things are going to happen as he wants them to and in the timing. So be encouraged by the message, the testimony of Esther, okay? So that's one thing. Second thing, if there's anybody in the house tonight or anybody joining us online, because we've been live streaming this. You're all famous now, okay? Yeah. Who has yet to give your life to Jesus Christ. Now is the time to do that. So if that's you, if you're here tonight or you're watching online tonight with us and you have yet to give your life to Jesus, right now let's just pray. Pray this right now. Jesus, I give my life to you. I want to follow you going forward for the rest of my life. I choose, God, to give up the way I've been going. Forgive me for going my own way. And I choose to follow your way now. Forgive me for all of my sins. And cleanse me, Lord, and fill me with your Spirit now. And I choose to follow your purpose and your plan, your destiny for my life. You are my Savior. You are my Lord. I believe you died on the cross for me and you rose from the grave 3 days later. Thank you, Jesus. If you prayed that tonight, please talk to us, message us, let us know, text us, however you need to, so we can, because we want to celebrate with you and we want to also help you to grow in your relationship with Jesus. So please reach out. But that's it for now. And feel free to stick around if you want. Have some Hamatashin cookies. Take a bite out of crime. Okay. And anyway, love you. Thanks for coming. And we'll see you next time, whenever that is. Some of you will be Sundays. Some will you be Saturdays. So anyway, blessings on you. Yeah, and one last thing. Janine, thank you for all the work you've put in to make this happen. Hours of work right there. And painting cups gold and all this stuff. She did a lot to just make this more special. So thank you, Janine. You're awesome. You're the MVP. Okay. All right. Blessings on you. Have a great night.